You're on, sir.
Okay, I'd like to call to order the Finance Committee meeting of February 15th, 2021 at approximately 5:01 p.m. Can I have a roll call, please?
Yes, you sure can. Councillor Beta,
Here.
Councillor Villarreal,
Present.
Councillor Romero Worth,
I'm here.
Councillor Cassett Sanchez, and Councillor Lindell.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. The next item is approval of the agenda. Are there any changes from staff?
No changes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, changes from the committee? Is there a motion regarding the agenda?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Can I have a roll call, please?
Yes. Councillor Beta,
Yes.
Councillor Villarreal,
Yes.
Councillor Romero Worth,
Yes.
Councillor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
and Councillor Lindell.
Yes.
Thank
Okay,
you.
the next item is approval of the consent agenda. Items to be removed from the consent agenda. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's see. Item F is in Frank.
Okay,
Item H. And item J.
okay, other items to be removed. Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez.
Item O.
Okay. Other items. Councilwoman Lindell, did you have anything?
No, thank you, Chair. Mine have already been pulled.
Okay, Councilwoman Romero Worth.
Everything I'm interested in has also been pulled.
Okay, so the consent items that have been pulled are item F, item H, item J, and item O. Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, can I have a roll call, please?
Councillor Beta,
Yes.
Councillor Villarreal,
Yes.
Councillor Romero Worth,
Yes.
Councillor Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
and Councillor Lindell.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so that brings us to approval of the minutes. These are the Finance Committee meeting minutes of February 1st, 2021. Are there any changes from staff?
No changes, Mr. Chair.
Changes from the committee? Is there a motion regarding the minutes?
To approve.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Can I have a roll call, please?
Councillor Beta,
Yes.
Councillor Villarreal,
Yes.
Councillor Romero Worth,
Yes.
Councillor Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
and Councillor Lindell.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, the minutes have been approved. So that brings us to action items, items that were removed from the consent agenda. The first is item F, which is consideration of bill number 2021-2, which is an ordinance approving global management performance contract with Dalkia Energy Solutions LLC, subject to city council approval of a separate financing transaction to finance the cost of the global management performance contract. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to ask some questions about the contract. I do think this is something that we really need. I'm appreciative of the staff and the time you spent working on this. I know it's been a long time I believe, looking at different options for us as it relates to lighting, LED lighting. And so I know all of us have had those complaints regularly about trying to replace the lights not working, trying to work with and collaborate with P&M, paying a lot of money to P&M to get those lights functioning, not always working that way. So I appreciate Director Wheeler and the work that your team has done. I was just wanting to know a little bit more about Dalkia. Is that the right way to say it? Okay. And I was looking at the contract and wanted to know a little bit more about, in terms of costs, to explain routine and non-routine maintenance and what that looks like. And yeah, I guess we'll start there. I have a few questions, so let's start there.
Okay, Ms. Wheeler.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councilor Villarreal, for the questions. Yes, this is sort of an exciting new frontier in streetlight maintenance for the city of Santa Fe. The LED lights is a much more solid product on our streetlights that will fail much less often, and then we will have a contract that's dedicated to our streetlights. And if you noticed in the contract, there's quite a few KPIs, key performance indicators, that the contractors held accountable for instance, repairs to multiple streetlights within 3 days of being reported. I mean, as we know, we've been living with streetlights out for months on end. But it's a very good question about the routine and the non-routine maintenance. We have Kevin Kay here from Dalkia, Director of Operations, to provide more specifics. But in my sort of understanding is that, you know, the light bulb itself is a routine maintenance. But sometimes the wires going to the pole, say, have been direct bury, and they say get frayed and short out to the ground. That's not routine maintenance. That's actually repairing our aging infrastructure, and so that would be billable. There's also some relatively minor cases in Santa Fe of copper theft that could cause a non-routine maintenance requirement. There's also car accidents that knock down poles. And that would be another case of non-routine maintenance, although it is worth noting that our risk team does get involved in those and try to subrogate the cost of a knockdown pole to the insurance company of the person causing the accident. So those are some of the examples of non-routine maintenance. And if you'd like to have some more information, I could have Kevin speak to us.
I guess I'm thinking along the lines of like defective equipment, and if that's considered routine or non-routine. And then I think they bill us per unit rate, and I'm just curious what the unit rate is.
Mr. Chair and Councilor Villarreal, you know, defective equipment is warranty, and so I wouldn't pay for work on a failed lamp that was installed. And then, I forgot what the second question was the
unit per unit rate,
because it says,
yeah.
That should be listed in the contract. We should have a unit price for each of the activities. Should be a sheet in there. Did you not?
I didn't see it, but then again, there were a lot of different pages, and I didn't see the actual unit rate, but I guess it's more than anything, not so much the unit rate, but what the warranty is that we have, how long the warranty is with them on certain equipment.
Thank you. Kevin, could you respond to that?
Yes. So the unit price list that you're referring to is just for, I just want to thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Can you introduce yourself, Kevin?
Yeah, Kevin Kay from Dalkia, Director of Operations, will be running the implementation as well as the maintenance contract above and beyond the implementation. So thank you for having me here today. The unit price list that you refer to is only for prices for repairs above and beyond routine maintenance. And routine maintenance is anything from the base of the pole to the fixture installed. That is what is included in routine maintenance. The warranty period for the lights installed are 10 years. So if there's a defect to the LED head itself, it is included in routine maintenance. There's no above and beyond billing for that. And we, as Dalkia, will work with the manufacturer on facilitating that warranty to replace the light.
Councilwoman Villarreal, you're on mute. You're still muted, Councilwoman Villarreal. Joe, do you think you can figure out why she's on mute? Okay, well, we figured that out. Are there any other questions from the committee? Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did have a question. There was references to, I believe it's artistic lights throughout or artistic light display throughout the contract. Can we get more information on what that is and if that is a consideration? Here, is that something that we are pursuing?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Councilor Cassett Sanchez, for the question. We are not pursuing artistic lighting at this time, but we could at the future date. So it's included in the contract in case we do expand to utilize that.
Okay, and thank you. And either Kevin or Regina, can we understand what that exactly means, knowing that it is an option?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Councilor, that's like a more artistic kind of light, not a big street light that's meant to, but maybe that lights up a boulevard or a sidewalk, a walkway, a path, a trail, something like that. Those kinds of lights that we could install in other places in, on, say, if we were to add additional lights to the Acequia Trail or something like that. They're sort of a different type, less industrial, not regular street lights. Maybe Kevin could add more clarification as well. I just found him again.
Chairman and Jamie, Councilman Jamie, thank you. Yes, artistic lighting, we recommend for lighting in between pole lights, hanging lights, or things of a decorative nature that add value to downtown areas, walkways, as Regina said, and also sides of buildings with LED lights that can be colored to bring out holiday festivities, events, all that kind of stuff. It is not an initial path forward for Regina, but it is in there for the future.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I didn't have any further questions.
Okay, any other questions from the committee? Councilor Rendell.
I was going to make a motion, Chair.
Where's Councilwoman Villarreal? Was she able to get back in? I'd hate to.
Oh,
move
I
over.
apologize. I realized she wasn't.
I'm working on that right now.
Okay, so we'll just give it a few minutes and see if we could get her back. She may have more questions. And then the other items, all the other items except, she pulled also, so we really can't proceed until we get her back in.
I'm on the phone with her right now, and we're gonna get her back in. I think we're just waiting for her to connect her audio. So let's see what happens here.
Mr. Chair, can she join by phone rather than by video?
Yeah, we may have to do that. Joe, maybe you can suggest that if we can't get.
Okay, I'll suggest.
She can probably have her video just going and then call in with her cell. So she can be seen and heard.
Let me let her. So what we're doing is she's doing a hard shutdown on her computer, which we're trying to get so she can get back in because we can't. Oh, you are? Okay. Okay. All right.
All right, thanks. Hey guys, I'm sorry. Every single time I'm on, it freezes and I cannot do anything. I can't touch keys, so I apologize. I did have a couple more questions. Did everyone already answer?
Everybody already asked. Go
Okay.
ahead, Councilwoman
All right.
Villarreal.
All right, I'm gonna try it. I'm just gonna leave it on. Hopefully it won't freeze again. I was just curious about what is considered proprietary for Dalkia, or do we own everything in terms of, I know the software had said that we would own it, but is there anything proprietary that if anything were to go wrong with the company, or we're not satisfied with the products or service long-term, I'm just curious if there's something that would keep us in this particular relationship if something were to happen.
Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, I'd like to answer one small piece of that. P&M is on the call with us tonight, and they are also converting the lights owned by P&M, which is almost half of the lights in the city. And we will be bringing a maintenance contract that changes the relationship between the city and P&M related to maintenance, so that they would only be maintaining their lights. Although they have generously, I believe, put a term into their maintenance agreement that says they will be available to perform maintenance on our lights should we choose that. So it does give us a backup while we go down this new path. And there's Jamie. Thank you so much for joining us, Jamie. And then the other thing that I would say is we had some significant discussions about the software because, this is a 15-year term for maintenance of our streetlights, and there'll be quite a bit of data in that software. It'll be extremely important to us. During the contract, we'll have licenses to the software, and I've worked with Dalkia to make sure that there are terms that allow us to get the data, to assume responsibility for those licenses in the software itself if we wanted to just convert and not have to migrate. So Kevin can add more color to this. He's more in depth, but we have taken a look at that and thought about, if we need to end this agreement or when the agreement does end, and some of those implications thereof. So if you could add a little bit, Kevin, thank you.
Great. Yes, thank you, Chairman, Councilwoman. To address your proprietary question, there is nothing proprietary that we own at Dalkia in this contract, as well as you will have full access to the software that we use. So I don't see any limitations should it ever reach a point where the contract is broken to continue maintaining and keeping all that data. You'll have access to all that. Okay,
good to know. Thank you. And then I guess, Director Wheeler, I was curious before we move forward with Dalkia, had you spoken to the City of Albuquerque staff to see how the conversion process went or how it's going? I'm not sure if they completed it. And then how it had been working or has been working with Dalkia?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Councilor Villarreal, thank you so much for that question. In fact, we've been working very closely with the director that was at the city of Albuquerque at the time during the conversion. And the transformation of the problems that they're having with streetlights is dramatic. Maybe 1/100th of the outages. They learned a lot of lessons doing the big conversion at the city of Albuquerque. They are complete. And we're the beneficiary of those lessons. These same people that were involved in the Albuquerque transition, like Kevin and Jamie and some of the project managers, are also involved in our project. So we have been doing a lot of lesson sharing and being the beneficiaries of that. And I think it's going really well. And perhaps, it's kind of be better to have someone from the city of Albuquerque here. But Kevin, could you provide any reporting from some of your first few months of the after conversion?
Sure, yes. Chairman, Councilwoman, thank you. We will have like Regina said, a very similar team doing the conversion that was done in the city of Albuquerque successfully with no safety incidents throughout the entire conversion of upwards of 20,000 streetlights. So we're very excited to roll out that same team, learned a lot of lessons, and plan to have another successful install here in Santa Fe.
Thank you. And Mr. K, right? K, there was an email was brought, well, this issue was brought to our attention about a lawsuit. And I'm just wondering if you can quell that concern that came up, and if that was a lawsuit with the city of Albuquerque, or if you can just make sure that that's not something that we should be concerned about for the city of Santa Fe.
Yes, and J.C. Florenson, who was key to this, is also on the line as well. He can add anything that needs to be added. But the lawsuits that you're referring to are with so originally City Loom had the contract as a sister company of ours. We consolidated in the United States to go under one umbrella under Dalkia. So you're getting the same type of long history of service that City Loom has, and will continue with Dalkia in the contract. Those are individual suits that are not have little to do with kind of our operations and maintenance. But I'll let JC confer a little bit more on that.
That'll require that Joe promote the phone or call, the dial-in. Actually, Jean-Christophe Florenson is who Kevin's referring to, and he's on the phone because he's in Houston, where they're frozen and have no power. And he's using the last of his cell phone battery to be with her tonight. But Joe, if you could promote that phone caller to the panelists, then he could respond.
I have given him permission to talk. It's just a matter of him now. I think he's ready to go, actually.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, member of the council. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. I apologize for not being able to join the video feed. As Rezia mentioned, I'm in the part of Houston today that has no electricity and no water, so I'm joining over the phone. To address the question about some of the lawsuits, so Citelum is named as co-defendant in Albuquerque, where there is some lawsuits where both the city of Albuquerque and Citelum as a contractor are named as co-defendants in lawsuits where there is allegation that lights might have been a reason for an accident to happen. So, and these lawsuits are being defended now, where Dalkia, on behalf of Citelum, is providing all the necessary information showing that the lights were properly maintained at the time of the events. So both, and there has been no findings of wrongdoing on the part of Citelum or Dalkia, and that's as far as I can extend on an ongoing case where Citelum and Dalkia are providing all the information to the city of Albuquerque in those cases.
And Chairman and Councilor, if I could add a little bit, this goes on with streetlights. The city of Santa Fe pays tort claims for potential aggravation of conditions that cause damages and accidents and incidents under streetlights that are not functioning. So it's not uncommon, and P&M and the city of Santa Fe have faced a couple of those since I've been here in the last 2 years. So it's not uncommon that suits be filed in some cases like that.
Okay, I guess I just wanted to clarify that and make sure we're covering our bases. And so are you comparing it to a malfunctioning light? Is that the issue?
That is usually why the tort claim is filed against the city and the contractor maintaining the lights, because a street light isn't functioning and then something happens in that vicinity.
Okay, so I didn't catch the person's on the phone, but is that the particular issue in this case for this litigation?
This is JC Froenson, and I'm the Vice President of Business Development for Dalkia and a former employee of Citelum. And yes, this is one of the allegations of the plaintiff that the lights was one of the reasons. And without going into too many details, I think thanks to the plan and the software that was put in place with this contract, we believe that we are able to provide the necessary information to actually show that the lights were properly maintained in those instances.
Okay, thank you, JC. Thanks for joining us. Good luck.
You're welcome.
And
thank you.
Thank you. Director Wheeler, I just had a question about just ultimately, we went through an RFP process, is that correct? So there were other groups considered?
Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, no, we did not. We used our procurement code, procurement method of use of existing contracts. So City of Albuquerque went through a full RFP.
Got it. Thanks for that clarity. For the pledge revenue fund, or just in general, can you explain the pledge revenues for me? Like how they work, how we're able to gain revenue from the conversion. I guess I'm trying to understand like how it becomes a fund that we use and for what purpose. I know it's payment on debt service, but can you just describe that a little bit more?
Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, we have both Brad Flitch and Peter Franklin here. I think they would be the right ones to answer that question.
Good evening, Councilor. Good evening, Chairman. On the Pledge Revenue Fund, so imagine in the Year Out Energy, in their investment grade audit, what they've done is they've projected a static city going out 18 years into the future and saying, okay, this is how much electricity a static future city would use, and this is what it would cost. And by replacing these pieces of equipment, solar panels on water pumps and LED lights and things, the city would only use this much electricity versus that static. So the difference between what we actually spend on electricity and what we were projected to spend on electricity is put into that special revenue fund in order to fund the debt service. And
Okay.
it's more complicated than that, but that's the gist of it.
So is there an actual, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is cost savings, or is it actually a fund that garners and revenue that we can use towards debt service?
No, it will, what we would do is, so if we allocate $100 to electricity today for the city, instead of budgeting $100 for electricity, we're going to budget $50 for electricity and $50 for the special revenue fund. And that
Okay.
special revenue fund will pay the debt service. Our electric costs will go down, but we're going to incur the debt service also.
Got it. Okay. And then there was one question I think we also got from a constituent, just this conversion, does this include replacing poles as well?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Villarreal, it does not unless a pole is non-functioning. We have got some money in the contract for making miscellaneous deferred maintenance repairs as we go through the conversion. So if there is a case where something needs to be replaced, we have some funds to cover that. Otherwise, we will be actually making a really great logging of the condition of our asset here and make a plan for repairs as necessary.
Do you know what that amount is right now, Director Wheeler? Just curious.
I do. It's we put $89,000 into the contract for that.
So okay, I guess we're just there may be some issues. I'm sure we're gonna find some issues in the future, but I think one pole would go beyond the cost of 89,000, wouldn't it? A replacement? No? Okay.
Surprisingly enough, it's like thousands. It's under 10,000.
Okay.
And the
Good
most,
to know.
I mean, the 50-foot poles on 599 might cost a little more, but generally I think I see like a $4,000 bill for a pole.
Okay, so that would be available for any infrastructure issues we have, and maybe consideration of appropriate poles for certain areas, like reconsideration or not necessarily?
It's not for new poles, it's for repairing. Like we expect to find some wiring that's in bad shape, maybe a broken pole. But if there's money left over, we could look at improvements. But certainly, Councilor Villarreal, if you have a request for an additional pole in a location, PNM is actually currently working on the one that Councilor Vigil-Koppler made us aware of that is desired by the state capitol. And we'd be happy to have your request as well and start working on that.
Yeah, I guess it was more about understanding, looking at existing poles that were more about safety issues versus wanting new poles because one is too tall for a certain neighborhood or something like that. So I just wanted to clarify that. I think that's it. Thank you for your patience, my technical difficulties.
Okay, is there a motion regarding this item?
Move to approve.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, can I have a roll call, please?
Councilor Beta,
Yes.
Councilor Villarreal,
Yes.
Councilor Romero Worth,
Yes.
Councilor Lindell,
Yes.
Councilor Cassett Sanchez.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, that item's been approved. Our next item is consideration, item H, which is consideration of bill number 2021-4, an ordinance approving lease purchase agreement and escrow agreement with Sterling National Bank for the purpose of financing the installation of energy efficiency measures in city facilities pursuant to the energy savings performance contract with Year Out Energy Services LLC and the global management performance contract with Dalkia Energy Solutions LLC. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to see, we have an agreement, actually an agreement and relationship with Sterling already. Is that correct? I don't know who's answering, maybe Director McCoy
Councilor,
or Brad. Okay.
Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, we do not have a relationship with Sterling at this time.
I thought we had other contracts with them.
The only contracts that I'm aware of is we have one with Wells Fargo for the golf carts. We have another one with Clean Energy regarding the compressed natural gas. I think we have one for something for the copy machines at City Hall.
Okay. So I guess the main question I had was trying to understand, or maybe you could explain why it's important to set up a purchase agreement, an escrow agreement, or lease purchase agreement and escrow agreement with a financial institution like Sterling. Maybe just explain their role in this in layman's terms.
Peter?
Regina, who was?
Chairman, thank you. I think Peter Franklin could explain that best. He's been working on the financial side.
Okay, go ahead,
Sure.
Mr. Franklin.
Mr. Chairman, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Councilor Villarreal, this is sort of a standard way that these types of improvements are financed by banking institutions. They like to do them as lease purchase agreements. The purpose of the escrow agreement is that they will hold the funds, and as Year Out and Dalkia invoice the city for progress payments on those installation agreements, Sterling Bank as escrow agent will release the funds to them. It's just their way of sort of making sure that the money goes for what it's supposed to go to.
And I also think, I mean, we were able to get some funding from the legislature, but the rest of this is funded through this particular mechanism with interest.
Yes, Councilor, the lease purchase agreement will, when the lease purchase transaction closes, the bank will advance an amount sufficient to pay the contract price of both the Year Out and the Dalkia agreements. And that money will be placed in escrow and will, as I said, will be released as progress payments. Meanwhile, the city is paying debt service from those pledged utility cost savings revenues. I think the debt service rate is, Brad, help me out.
2.146, I think.
Right, I was gonna say 2.15, but a little less than that.
Chairman, I'm sorry.
Over 18 years.
And if I could add to that, yes, Councilor Villarreal, you're correct. We received $925,000 from the legislature for this project, and that has been applied towards the total cost of the project. And so we were able to borrow that much less money.
Got it. Okay. There is an equipment lease purchase agreement. There's an equipment schedule on page, I think it's 18. And a lot of it had some edits. They were like, I think it was still in draft form. So I was wondering, at least the attachment we received, I'm wondering if we got all that cleared up. It was details about what renewable energy entailed.
Councilor, if I may answer that, the descriptions of the utility cost savings improvements and the LEDs have been updated in that agreement and are now in final form. I thought I had distributed that updated form of agreement to the city, but I can send it straight away here.
I was just curious because it did ask a good question on renewable energy. It was asking if it was limited to solar panels and related equipment, and it said more details needed.
That was my question.
Okay. Did that get answered?
Yes, it did.
And is renewable energy more than, is it limited to solar panels?
Well, I don't have the agreement up in front of me. If it's related to the year out agreement, the solar panels are the main part of the improvements to BDD facilities. And I think some other city facilities as well. Regina's going to know this better than I do. If it's Dalkia, it's all streetlights.
Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, yes. We are only installing solar systems as a renewable energy solution on this project, but there is quite a bit of equipment associated with the solar array. It includes the inverter, and wiring and connectors, and some are ground mounts, some are carports. So there'll be that kind of equipment. And so I expect that, solar panels are certainly the primary, but they don't feed it onto the grid without an inverter. So there are a number of pieces of equipment in the system.
Okay. Maybe the next, I think this goes to council next. If we could just make sure the updated one, not the edited or the draft version, is in our packet material. I think that's all I had. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, other questions from the committee?
Move to approve.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, can I have a roll call, please?
Yes, you can. Councillor Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
Councillor Villarreal,
Yes.
Councillor Lindell,
Yes.
Councillor Romero Worth,
Yes.
Councillor Beta.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Okay, so that brings us to item J, which is request for approval of amendment number 1 to original service contract 20-0263 with Facility Build Inc. to increase compensation in the amount of $445,000 for design build services on a new restroom in downtown Santa Fe. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I hope Mr. Randall's with us. I just wanted to ask a couple questions. I'm excited this is happening. I'm very supportive. I just wanted to understand the players here and some funding changes. So Lloyd and Associates was hired initially, correct, for design and architectural. I don't know if it was drawings or can you refresh our memory about that?
It was basically concept. Mr. Chair, Counselor, it was basically concept drawings that Lloyd and Associates did.
Okay, so concept drawings, not an official architectural design. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Counselor, he did do a design, but at the time, the funding wasn't there to pursue it.
Okay, and so this next iteration facility build is now in play, and they're going to be doing architectural design now?
Mr. Chair, Counselor, they have done a design and they have gone ahead and gotten it all priced out to ensure that this budget would be sufficient to cover the design that was approved.
Okay, so Lloyd and Associates is no longer in the picture.
Mr. Chair, Counselor, that is correct.
Okay, so then we have facility build that came in, and are they utilizing Lloyd and Associates?
Mr. Chair, Counselor, they are not. They did a new design.
Can you provide the new design in the packet? I don't know if it's in there.
Mr. Chair, Counselor, I did not see it. I did not bring this forward, but maybe Kurt could answer that.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Counselor. No, I did not provide that in the packet for the new design for the new, the way that they redesigned it. We went through several changes with them, going through the design with Mr. Randall and the mayor, a few other people on the way that it should look, the way that it was positioned on the property there at the parking lot. But I do actually have the design. I can send that out if anybody wants to see it, so that's no problem.
That would be great, because I know there were some issues in the prior design and they were working on fixing them, but I was just curious what shifted. Can you tell us what changed? Like, what are the major changes from the original design?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Councilor, the original design had it up against the existing building there on the very east end of the Water Street parking. It was basically going to be just a long straight building that was attached to, or basically backed up to the existing building. One of the problems we ran into with some of the costs was when you build a building next to an existing building, it has to be a fireproof wall. So that was going to be a much more costly design. The one that Lloyd did originally came in at the time. The budget was only $500,000 for this project, and when we went out for preliminary pricing, it came in at over $1 million, and that was one of the big considerations. Excuse me. So basically, it's been rotated out now along the parallel to Water Street, where they can see it from the street. It's not going straight back towards the Indian Palace restaurant. So it'll be kind of fronting the street, and I apologize for not putting that in the packet. I didn't know if they would want to see that since I had the cost in there, but I will certainly send that out to all the counselors to look at.
Yeah, that would be great, just so we can, well, at least we'll know if we're asked about the design and what changed.
Yeah, quite a bit. We angled it. We did some angle work to it. We put up like a little mini courtyard there that we're going to have some arts and public place come in with some of their funding for this project, do a little bit of artwork in there. It's going to, it looks nice. I mean, the design that we finally came up with, it's changed several times from the original design. It's just totally different from what it was from the beginning. Even once Facility Build picked up the project, their original design was not quite what was wanted, and so we have a pretty nice design now for a restroom. It's going to be really nice. Has a kiosk in it for tourism. They'll be able to watch the people going in and out. It's going to be pretty. It'll be a good addition to the downtown area.
No, thanks, Kurt. Was the design change for the water basin, the shared water basin, or the shared sink? You know how they had the original design of a shared sink? Did that change, or is that still in play?
No, we have two different sides now. We are going to go with kind of like a cast concrete sink. There'll be individual sinks, but they'll be cast and put into the wall there. They won't be individual attached. It'll be a long counter with sinks built in out of concrete is what we're looking at now.
But it's
Mr.
shared,
Chair,
right?
Councilor, the common sink area, though, is no longer in existence.
Okay.
And I think that was perhaps maybe one of the controversial items that you were thinking of, and that has been removed from this plan.
Okay. I didn't necessarily think it was controversial, but some people did bring it to our attention. So it is good to know there's a change on that. And then there was another, I don't know if Kurt or who would want to answer this, but in the packet material, it talked about a $90,000 charge or expense for unforeseen circumstances, but didn't explain what it was. Can you explain that to us?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Councilor, that's basically a contingency that we like to put into some projects, because being down in that area, there may be some archaeological things that happen down there, some type of when we do the infrastructure for putting in the sewer and hooking the water up, the electricity, that's just an unanticipated cost overrun. That's not guaranteed that the contractor will get that. That's just basically a contingency in case we do need some extra funding, so the project doesn't stop and we don't have to come back to ask for something, that could be a minor change or something minor while they're doing the construction, and we can keep moving ahead. But that's not guaranteed to the contractor at all. Just the 900,000, the 90,000 is not guaranteed. That's at our discretion.
Got it. Okay, that's very helpful. I was trying to figure if that was something that was already in play or if it was backup in case what you just said, there may be some things that we didn't anticipate. I think that's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, other questions? Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Can I have a roll call, please?
Yes. Counselor Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
Counselor Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Romero Worth,
Yes.
and Counselor Beta.
Yes.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. That item is approved. That brings us to item O, which is a resolution requiring governing body approval prior to announcing the availability of any city-owned land, buildings, or other real property for sale. This item was heard and postponed at the governing body meeting of February 10th, specifically so that the Finance Committee could look at the fiscal impact report. I see that Councilors Garcia and Vihel Koppler are with us as sponsors of the resolution. So if there's any questions or if they'd like to comment, I'll give them the opportunity, but we'll go ahead and get started with Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez. You pulled this. Then we'll go through the Finance Committee. And again, I'll allow the other councilors who have joined us to participate also. So Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez.
Chair, I primarily wanted to explore the FIR and both just kind of some general questions about, I think a broader discussion about FIRs is in order at some point, whether we do that tonight or very, very soon. But I did want to explore some of the pieces that were in this FIR that were listed as points of interest. So we'll just get started. So the first one that I saw was that it says that it's notable that this resolution does not set a minimum threshold to trigger a public presentation. And I was curious to hear a little bit more about from the preparers of the FIR, why that is notable and what are some of the situations that it sounds like there's potential concern for.
Mr. Chair, good evening to the members of the council. Councilor, I'm going to have Andrea speak to that, but we also have a short presentation that will give you some context on the bigger picture on the exceptions and the fiscal impact of the FIR. And I'll state two things before we move forward. One, I state that the Economic Development Department and Asset Development Department does agree to the resolution. We are ready to move forward with the resolution. And secondly, that we did go back to HR, Finance, and Legal and have extracted the staff overtime cost related to the FIR. So that has been removed. But there are other fiscal impacts, and that will sort of be talked about in the presentation that we have, because we've been reviewing land sales since about June of last year. So if you would indulge me, I'd like to just go through a couple slides if I could, and then hopefully we'll answer your questions.
Yeah, that would actually be great. I think that a presentation is wonderful. So thank you for preparing that.
Sure, thank you so much. So I think we have screen shareability and I'm joined tonight with Andrea Salazar from our legal team, so she can sort of talk about the legal issues that are involved. And there is a slide that we've hidden that talks about Boys and Girls Club, but we're not going to show it tonight. So we can respectfully have our chair at the meeting. So we'll just briefly mention that there are some issues with a property that belongs to the Boys and Girls Club, but we're not going to talk about it in detail. So what we did was we put together a group of slides just to give you some context on the prior discussions we've had in the history of land sales that we've been reviewing. And so I just want to sort of take you back a bit. I came on as director in October of 2019. So some of this discussion started back in June. So I'm going to have Andrea sort of talk through the disposition options that we have discussed in executive session, and then we'll move forward to the goals that we were reviewing. So Andrea, if you could talk through these different.
Chair, committee members, thank you for having us tonight. So I have sent you all out a attorney-client privilege decision tree about the state statute and evaluating the process for for sale and disposition of land. But this is kind of a generic, these are the 5 ways that we could dispose of property. We have a private sale, a public sale, a request for proposals, exchange or donation of real property with state or any local public subdivisions or the federal government, or we can donate real property pursuant to the Local Economic Development Act, LEDA, or the Affordable Housing Act. So those are our real 5 strategies. Most of the time, the first 3, when we're talking about disposition of assets for monetary value, we're talking about the first 3. Private sale, where we just engage in a sale that's queued up, where someone either offers a piece of property, a price for a piece of our property. Public sale is more of a public bid process where we put the piece on the market and the height goes to the highest bidder. Request for proposals is like the Midtown site where we seek proposals and evaluate them and take it through the procurement process. I did want to address your question, Councilor Cassett Sanchez, which talked about the minimum threshold. The reason that we put that in the language there is because under the statute, which is 3-54-1, there is a minimum threshold, which is the $25,000. If a piece of property is under $25,000, then it's not subject to a referendum period. But we also have sales of property that have existed years back, slices of easements, we have sidewalk pieces, we have pieces of right-of-way that might not be used. All of those things would still be looked at as a public presentation that would go through this whole process if we're not putting a minimum or a maximum amount of money attached to that sale amount. So that is why we did put that in there. Thank you.
Okay. So the next slide really just talks about the fact that since June of 2019, we've had a series of executive session meetings with the governing body to talk about investigating assets, looking at the strategies around what do we do with the underperforming ones, what do we do to move it forward. And we've had the following goals since that time. And in June, Kevin Kellogg was actually the asset development manager, and I was just on the economic development team. And then coming in January, we moved over to my new role, and the next slide will address that. But we had 4 different goals: maximizing the city's investments, take non-performing assets off the city's books, obtain something the city desires. One of them is housing, so we could use those assets. We talked about the scattered sites in one of our discussions, and then build trust through transparency. So we recognize that coming to our governing body in the current period, it was through the executive session, but we do come back to the governing body in a full public debate when a public parcel is up for sale. And that was at the recommendation phase. And now we're talking about having that debate at the proposal stage when we look at a parcel or property that might be up for sale. And if you recall, back in January of 2020, I put this slide up to say, I believe we are going to head into an economic downturn back in January 2020. And so this slide is very prescient because what we were trying to do as we were thinking about asset sales is that we wanted to sort of capitalize on the current business and consumer climate so that we could sell the assets that we thought were non-performing that could go to the market, but then close them because we recognized that one of the things we're going to need to do in this economic downturn was to figure out ways to stimulate the economy, look at recovery, look at resiliency. So while I was off by almost a year, this is happening now, and we are probably still going to be in a downturn as we go into FY22. So our strategy around why we were selling these assets was about this slide here that we talked about in January about need to get ahead of any economic downturn and using some of the windfall non-performing assets to address the economic downturn and to stimulate our economy. So from there, I'm going to ask Andrea if you could talk through the requested process for real property.
So the asset team has developed a process, and this was really about what we heard from you counselors, that we had a number of people who were interested in pieces of property. And so we wanted to know, how do we move forward on those? And so it had been determined that this was the protocol that we were moving forward. And this is what we have been following our path to obtain our own appraisal. So the city obtains appraisal itself, place a public notice that real property is for sale. Staff is creating both ads that go into the New Mexican and the Reporter, and staff has created a website that people can look at, which has due diligence documents. Then staff would accept offers for a period of 60 days from public notice. Staff will present the offers to governing body, depending on the type of scheme there is, whether it's a private sale, a public sale, an RFP, a swap. That all depends on kind of what the offers look like, whether it's an evaluation committee that narrows down the offer to present, or whether it's all the offers that are presented at a private sale. Once the offer is accepted, staff would go through the sale ordinance process, which is drafting up a sale that includes a purchase agreement. That ordinance cannot move forward to public hearing unless all the details, like the price of the sale, who the purchaser is, all those details, when the timing for the purchase, all of that is included in the ordinance along with the purchase agreement. If it exceeds the 25,000 mark, then it has a referendum period of 45 days prior to closing. At the end of that period, then there is a closing. So what we wanted to highlight for you in a couple of these slides are some of the discussions that we have had previously. And this first one is the Santa Fe Estates discussion. So between March 2020 through February of 2021, we've had executive sessions about this piece of property, explaining, one, we participated in an agreement with Santa Fe Estates, who was the previous owner. And so we were terminating that agreement for the city to own the property and then be able to market it. So the area is already master planned. There aren't any infrastructure improvements. We obtained appraisal on March 19th, 2020, that evaluated the property is approximately $4 million. There, at the time and currently, I believe there were 6 interested parties, no formal letters of intent. And so starting in February, we set up our website, put that out in ads, and have it open for offers currently. So that is the first property.
Mm-hmm.
These 2 properties we have talked about also during this time frame, starting in March of 2020, Warehouse 21 and the Market Street condo. Both of those we obtained appraisals last year. So February 6th for Warehouse 21, March 12th for the Market Street condo, which is Suite 200. The city had received a letter of interest. This is kind of what spurred that Warehouse 21, how should we proceed with it? For high density housing, the entity was interested in the building and the adjacent parcel. So we had started that discussion about queuing that up for sale. With the Market Street condo, we also received a letter of interest for the building, for that condo portion purchase. Proposal was to have the city continue leasing the space to city departments and build out the raw space to accommodate additional city departments. So those were all discussions that we have had. We haven't put this on the market yet, but our time frame for our appraisals, and we will be talking about that at the end, is approximately a year. So, if we go beyond the appraisal date, then we will have to obtain new appraisals for these properties. So I did want to explain that the only piece of property that the city has sold from 2020 to the present is the Santa Fe Clay building. And I know there's been a lot of discussion about this. The city didn't have it on the market. Instead, Santa Fe Rail Yard Community Corporation, SFRCC, who was under their lease and management agreement, had both the building and the ground under their lease and management agreement. They had an interested party who wanted to have the ground lease, but wanted to buy the building instead of lease the building because they wanted to do substantial renovations to it. So they asked if their potential tenant could buy the building. And we evaluated the appraisal. At that time, it was with Kevin Kellogg, who also went out with the appraiser and looked at the building and understood what all of the complicated factors with the building were. and presented that to governing body. That ordinance for sale of the building was approved in January 29th, 2020. Luna Capital, due to COVID and investments and all kinds of things that had complicated the situation, submitted an amendment to the purchase agreement that went through, I believe, at the end of November, beginning of December. And that purchase agreement and closing occurred on December 31st of last year. So that is the only piece of property that has actually been sold. And I did want to explain that.
This last slide really just talks about the going into the fiscal impact aspect to it. And there are two major bullet points here. One is that, again, staff time, fiscal impact updated. I'm trying to get a new FIR to everyone on the council, and that's going through Jesse Ian. So you should hopefully get that after it's reviewed from Mary and Aaron at the legal department. But the other potential fiscal impact is that from what you've seen in context of the discussions we've had about properties, every time we came to one of the executive sessions to talk about properties, we had a appraisal ready to go, appraisal. And so those appraisal amounts are finishing up in their shelf life. We will have to renew them going forward as we look at any of these properties that will have to come through this public notice resolution that we're discussing. So I wanted to lay that out so you know that we will have to update appraisers as we look through, but we're also looking at there's some serious market conditions with the appraisals and also the commercial real estate space. So there is time of essence to some of these properties, but the main big picture is that as we look at them over the next almost 45 days, some will have new appraisals that need to be done and some will not. And so that I wanted to share is that there is no fiscal impact from a staff time standpoint, but there could be potentially some impacts ranging, I think, Andrea, from 2,000 to 7,000 per parcel. Am I correct?
Yes,
from 2,000 7,000 per parcel.
Yeah, the appraisals approximate about 3,000 per appraisal. It depends on how complicated the property is or how large it is, but that's about the average.
Yeah. So that concludes our presentation, but I wanted to provide that context for the discussion today for this financial committee, and we are open for questions now.
Okay, Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that presentation. I do appreciate it. Get to the appraisals in a minute. I'm curious about the, Andrea, you had mentioned kind of those smaller pieces of land, the easements, the sidewalks, et cetera, that we might sell that would be under 25,000. How frequently do we see those?
No, I don't know the frequency. The best person to talk to would probably be, and I could ask him before governing body meeting, is Ed V. Hill. He definitely has a lot of information about what has happened in the past. And, you know, sometimes you have things where the city owns a piece of property and someone's property is encroaching on it. And so we queue up some type of sale to facilitate what's going on, or vice versa. I mean, those little things have happened in the past, but I would need to reach out to him to give you a direct answer.
Yeah. Mr. Chair and Councilor Casa Sanchez, I also want to introduce Sean Moody, who's our new asset development manager. So he also may provide any insight that you have because he has been involved in our real estate asset for a number of years and now is new on staff full time.
I don't think I could elaborate on that. There are a number of things, either a short-term lease or license, or a very small patch of land, as Andrea was alluding to, usually part of something related to a resident or owner or piece of right-of-way or whatever.
And so in a situation such as that, would what we are considering here apply? Because what I'm understanding is that would be somebody saying, hey, we want to purchase this piece of land from the city, and we're talking about publicly listing something for sale. So would this resolution impact situations such as that?
Councilor, a short answer is that the resolution doesn't necessarily define what a public sale is queued up for. So the reason why I'm saying that is the first slide delineating, you know, public private sales. What we're talking about is technically a private sale. And that is actually what we have created the template for, that all private sales, even if we're getting letters of interest, we're basically creating a public process for it. It's not a public auction, but we're putting out public notice. And so we do have circumstances, we have a lot of circumstances where people have offered us money for pieces of property. And so there's been a request, well, no, we don't want to take that offer. Let's make it a public notice sale. So put it publicly out there. I think that the terms of art, which are defined in the statute, mean one thing. The terms of art that we're using for how we're selling things is slightly different and a little bit outside. I would say almost everything we're talking about right now is a private sale, unless it's going out for auction or RFP.
So maybe this is a question for the sponsors about intention of in what situations would this resolution come into play?
Councilwoman Villarreal, you're on the committee and one of the sponsors. Do you want to answer that?
Well, I actually was going to defer to Councilwoman Vihel Koppler, because I actually don't know the answer to that about sidewalks and small land parcels.
Or even just the situations like they describe when we get a letter of interest, for example, Warehouse 21. How I'm just trying to understand how this would impact. If there is a letter of interest and we're interested in it, do we just go ahead and vote as we would with the ordinance for the sale? Or at that point, would we then have the option to reject it and then say, but we do want to put it up for sale and list it, and then we'd vote for that. So Councilor Vihel Koppler, if you could provide some more information, that would be wonderful.
Go ahead, Council Vihel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure if I lost a little bit of the intent of your question along the way, but I am totally cognizant now of some of the issues regarding the small parcels. And I know that since I've been on the council, there have been two that I can recall, 2 land sales that were related to encroachments and such, and they were very small pieces. One was along Richards Avenue, and it was kind of a useless little piece of stretch where the adjacent owner wanted to buy it. And then I think there was one, I remember Councilor Villarreal, you might recall, I think there was something that you were very interested in where we sold some land somewhere in your district. I can't remember, but there's only been 2. But I am fully aware that there may be strips or parcels or easements of land that are small in nature, and that only the adjacent owner would want something like that to resolve an issue with regard to the lot lines and such, and where the city wouldn't have any use for that strip anyway. So I am willing to do an amendment that would cover things like that. And maybe if I proposed an amendment that exempted property 25,000 and less, as Ms. Salazar pointed out, that would resolve, I think, the issues in regard to the lesser pieces. So I think that would be, that discussion is well taken, and I can see where that might be something I might want to consider an amendment for. Did that answer? Counselor?
Yes, that answered part 1. And then the other part was, a situation that that Rich and Andrea were discussing, where we've received a letter of interest for Warehouse 21, I believe. In those types of situations, how would this resolution impact our current process, or would it potentially not?
Well, I can answer that with the experience we did have when that came up. in that instance, the public was really upset that there, you know, it seemed that we only owned the building. Of course, Rail Yard owned the land. So the price for that seemed extremely low. And I think when the public found out, they were pretty upset that they didn't get to buy or offer a piece of, their purchase agreement for that property because it seemed so low. Now, that was because it was only the building, and I was able to get $25,000 more for it in the end with an amendment. But nevertheless, it did bring up the issue where the public was upset that they didn't know that we were selling land. And that was where this first kind of came to my attention, because what we were seeing on Warehouse 21 was after the fact. And so, you know, I think at the time we were all learning on the council, well, maybe not all of us, but that's the way things were done. But we did get a lot of people at the council meeting commenting, and we also got people writing us emails about how upset they were.
Counselor, I'm sorry, I'm gonna, that was Santa Fe Clay. Warehouse 21 we have not sold. Sorry.
I'm totally mixed. Okay.
Santa Fe Clay, and we, yeah, and I know that was a bit of a different situation because of the land lease. Whereas Warehouse 21, also in the rail yard, is it a similar situation, Rich, where they would just be purchasing the building? There would be a land lease underneath. So it is similar to Santa Fe Clay. Am I correct?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Casas-Sanchez, yes, that's correct. And it's, again, any letters of intent would come to us. And I think your question is around, if you get an unsolicited offer, do we bring it the whole proposal to the governing body? Because then we want to put it out for public offering. So if we get an unsolicited offer, do we take that letter of intent, make that a part of a public offering presentation, and then go for a big sale? I think that would be the process. I think that's what the resolution is asking us to do too. And we're more than happy to do that. We do get unsolicited offers for sale. So, but uniquely, and I think Andrea may have spoken to this, that every parcel of land we own is not clean. Everything has some small change, history, doodad, rigmarole, whatever you want to call it. It has something attached to it that allows us to spend a lot of time to bring it up to a diligence level where it's a clean sale, where everyone feels like we're going to make a transaction here. So Warehouse 21 is a perfect example of, we might get a letter of intent, but then we also have to think, we have to work with the rail yard because they lease the land out and then we own the building. How does that all work? So you're correct that we would bring any unsolicited offer in this new resolution. We'd bring it off forward to say, would you like us to come forward with a public offering, full public offering for sale? Because now we've had an unsolicited offer that they'd like to pursue.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And then in terms of how this impacts timing of being able to get something to sale, we currently will already get a presentation if there is a proposal to sell a piece of our property in executive session. So what I'm trying to understand is how does bringing it, whether we also do an executive session and then would do it publicly as well, how does that extend our time period, and how does that change your preparation time as you are already bringing it to us at a council meeting, as well as already having to prepare a presentation for us that we frequently see in executive session?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Casas-Sanchez, I'm going to have Andrea sort of articulate it further, but I think on the big picture level, the resolution states that we're allowed to bring confidential harm liability issues to executive session, but we can still discuss the wholesale public offering presentation in the public. But if there's something that has some sort of liability issue, some harm to a participant, or some issue where it should be based on a confidential basis, we would go into executive session to discuss that aspect of it. And so Andrea may want to expand upon that, but I think that's the offer. And then, I'm sorry, you asked about how long it might take to bring it to market. With the new resolution, what we're actually doing now is that we usually have one executive session, and now we were going to have 2 committee meetings plus a governing body meeting to make sure the public offering is ready to go and approved. So that will take a little bit more time. And so we're just making sure that all those appraisals we've done in the past, we just need to monitor those dates, because we will have to buy another appraisal, because one of the outcomes of the Santa Fe clay sale was that we got consensus from the full governing body that if it's our property, we need to buy the appraisal for it. It does not come from the buyer. It has to come from us, the seller.
Okay, so, but if there is something that's a timely manner, we could potentially skip committee and just pop an item straight to discussion. Is that correct? So if we were really under the gun with the.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Castellanos, I think I'd asked Councilor Vihil-Coppler if that is something that we could do.
Councilwoman Vihil-Coppler, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, that definitely is something. I didn't foresee this requiring going through committee, although when there's time, I think certainly that could happen. But what I was seeing was that we were going straight from executive session into action when we did not vote. And typically, if there's an action item after executive session, we certainly have the executive session, and then the next thing we do is come out of executive session and go to a vote, and it's on the agenda. So what was troubling to me was that we were not voting after executive session, and I think it's important to be transparent about that and have a discussion if need be about what we were voting on, because what I also experienced was that you weren't always getting consensus in executive session. And clearly my thought was that we would eventually vote on it, and we never did. And so the purpose of this is to be transparent and to actually conduct a discussion and a vote in public rather than moving from executive session to action. So anything that would accomplish that, and because it is a highly time-sensitive issue, I would think that staff would forego committee if they didn't have to go to committee and go straight to council, because essentially that's what you do now, but without a governing body vote. So none of this has ever gone through committee, and I don't necessarily think that it has to. But that I think every situation would be different, but so far I haven't seen any situation which has required committee. Thank you, Mr.
Yeah, that I think that was where I was getting a little bit confused on the fiscal impact report, is just the understanding of how this is really expanding the timeline to a place that could actually be detrimental to our sale. And that was my understanding, is that as we normally do go to an executive session anyhow, and then simply could take it to a public discussion and vote, and that we would have the option to skip committee. Although we may want to go through committee, because that is where we do have opportunities to have some of these discussions. So if there is time, I generally am in favor of things going to committee, as we hope to do a large part of the work in committee. But I understand with some of this, because there is the executive session component and there is that discussion that needs to happen about some of the strategy to be considered with sale, I would understand if some of these did not go to committee and simply went straight to executive and then to a public discussion and vote by the governing body. Rich or Andrea, is there anything else that I haven't thought about or hasn't been discussed in terms of considerations for the timing factor? I know that was a big piece of making sure that we can get things to market on time. There was this discussion of, it could delay things up to 6 months, and I was not fully understanding that as at this point, it's simply a vote to say, yes, we want to list this for sale, not even to accept the sale. And then we would have to still go through the vote to accept the sale. There's still the referendum period. All of that still stands. All that's changing is that there is simply a vote at the beginning to say, yes, go ahead, let's list this, correct?
Chair, Councilor Cassett Sanchez, I'd just like to kind of probably expand on the process. So every time we come to you, there is diligence that we do on these pieces of property. And I know that there's been lots of discussion of why aren't you just bringing things to us, even when you think about them without diligence. A lot of the things that we're discussing in executive session have to do with potential financial factors, potential litigation factors, potential lease factors. Often it's, we don't own the land, we own the building, we don't own the building, we own the land. They're complicated, and they're things that under the Open Meetings Act are exempt from public discussion. They're allowed in executive session, the disposition of land. And so that is why we have been taking that. The reason I'm just talking about that is because of the land that we own, this is probably not going to negate executive session. That's just, I do want to be explicit about that we probably will need to always be in executive session to discuss those features of the land. This would then just say, now we want a public presentation, like the condensed Cliff Notes version of that presentation in public, and we want a full vote of it. So the time frame that if we're just going to executive session and having a public presentation for governing body, what could happen is if there's not a meeting of the minds of the governing body on how to sell or dispose of the property, because we do have options. We have a public bid process, we have a request for proposal process, we have a private sale process. So that could be where there might be some delay, is having a meeting of the minds of how are we going to dispose of this? What is the sales strategy? So that's one thing that we have contemplated that could occur. The other thing is maybe, not everyone wants to sell it or not. And so we've already potentially obtained an appraisal so we know how much it is, and that takes time to then bring it to market. It's also what we talked about earlier with the whole process of putting out a public notice. Should it be a private sale? Putting out public notice, putting it in the newspaper, putting it out on our website, taking bids, having the team, have a discussion panel. All of those types of factors do take a bit of time. And then you have the ordinance process, the public hearing process, the referendum process. So when you start stacking those items on top of each other, including the negotiation between the parties, it does take time. That is why each one of these is a time sensitive thing of its own, is because as we witnessed with Santa Fe Clay, which is the only piece of property we've sold in a long time, but that took a year to come to its fruition, even from the ordinance process, which did take several months to go through. So when we look at how long it takes for a sale, it just depends. And we can't anticipate exactly how long it'll take. It just depends.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to say, I do appreciate all the diligence that is put in before you bring things to us. We definitely like having that information as we're making decisions. It was more just, and I understand that there is so much that goes in, and those sales do take a long time. Really just the understanding of how adding this piece in changes that. And I would say, I do agree that if there's not a meeting of the minds and a majority of the council is not in agreement of how we should dispose of property, then I don't think we should dispose of that property until there is a meeting of the minds of the majority of the governing body. So I think those are all my questions for now. I will yield the camera for the moment. If I have anything else, I will pop up after other members of the committee have had an opportunity to speak. Thank you so much.
Okay, we had a presentation by staff. I guess my question, and I'll start with Councilwoman Vihil Koppler, is there something else about the resolution that you'd like to go over, or do you want to briefly describe the resolution again, and then we'll go to questions from the other committee members?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to say just some opening comments about it, and I thank the Finance Committee for your questions. But my original intent was to make sure that the governing body was in agreement to consider and sell parcels of land. That's our fiduciary responsibility. And so the only way you can ensure that is to vote. And the only way you can vote is if you're not in executive session. And I felt like there was a fine line in violation of the Open Meetings Act by taking consensus or majority of consensus to action. And so the other piece of the purpose behind the resolution is to ensure the public knows what we are considering and what we have up for grabs potentially. And so that there's an understanding from anybody in our community who wanted to make a bid that they would, be inspired by our conversation that we are going to put this property on the market. And again, I just want to say that I think that's our fiduciary responsibility, and it's our responsibility to follow the Open Meetings Act. And it's our responsibility to, we're the caretakers of public land, taxpayer funded land. And so the discussions in executive session are certainly good to have, but I think they need to be on the agenda and open for discussion, and that's where the public knows what we're doing. My thoughts on the process are really that if there's a letter of interest out of the blue, if there's staff comes up with an idea that, oh, this would be great if we would consider selling this for whatever reasons, that first they see if we want to sell it, if the governing body wants to sell it. Because if we don't want to sell it, there's no reason to go through all that work. And what I'm hearing tonight, and it kind of concerns me, and I could be misunderstanding, is that staff would still do all this work and then bring it to us to see if we want to sell it. So that kind of isn't getting at what I think needs to happen. It's just, hey, we have Market Street, we're thinking of selling it, for example. Do you guys want to sell it? And so we say, well, we ask our questions, and then we maybe direct staff to go and do the discovery and see what it is they want to do. And if an appraisal needs to be ordered, well, sometimes you can order those ahead of time, and then decide if the governing body says, no, we don't want to sell it, you can always cancel the appraisal. But because appraisers are backed up sometimes. But that was really the intent here. And again, I'm willing to prepare some amendments for the 25,000. I think that makes sense. But that is what I wanted to accomplish. And so that's what I have to add for this resolution. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councilor Garcia, did you want to briefly let us know what your intent was as a sponsor of the resolution also?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And many thanks to the Economic Development team for their presentation and their support of this resolution. I think, time is always of the essence for transparency. And that's the intent of this resolution. In regards to timing, I don't think I think there was a misrepresentation of this adding 6 months to the potential process of sale of property, because ultimately, even if it went through the committee process and it got added to a governing body calendar, I don't see this adding potentially more than a month to the process. So we can't look at the overall process that it would have went through already. If it, the example was given for Santa Fe Clay, that it took a year to sell. That was a year, and then would have been a year and 1 month without the outcry from the public that we had. So this intention is to ensure that the public is well aware of any sale of any lands that we are considering, because the way it is right now, it's the rules are written. Somebody can make an offer on City Hall, and our team can begin to look at everything and then move forth with us for a proposal that we're going to sell City Hall. Well, do we really believe that's accurate? I think that should come to us first before we say, okay, here's this offer on the table. Yes, move forward and explore that. Or no, we're not going to sell City Hall. The intent, as I mentioned, is transparency. And what we want is to ensure that the public is well aware of whatever public lands that are potentially up for sale, they're well aware of. Because at the end of the day, it is their public lands. It's not ours individually, it's all of ours as the whole as Santa Feans. And so we just want to ensure that everybody is well aware of those properties that come up for sale when we decide if and when to sell them. That's all I had, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Garcia. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Mr. Chair, I had a couple of questions. I guess I was thinking about this as a way to go back to how we used to do it. I think it was really helpful when Matt O'Reilly was with us. And I would say this happened 3 or 4 years ago. He brought up the potential of Santa Fe Estates just to give us the lay of the land. Like, this is what's happening. This is the circumstance of this land. This is coming up. And before we even made any decision about how that was going to move forward, he just gave us an overview of that parcel of land and saying that this is the potential. These are our options, or what we think we may do. And before doing a lot of due diligence, it was just really giving us the lay of the land, and that was helpful. And then we had other executive sessions about it. So I think that kind of process led me to think that it would be helpful to know through executive session to then make a decision publicly about a vote after an executive session. And that's why I supported this resolution, because I think that step, I haven't seen that step lately. So I guess I just wanted to just make sure in the process of due diligence that we do our due diligence and the governing body has an opportunity to weigh in. And if people don't agree for a particular piece of land for sale, then that's how they vote. And so I think that's important to show that. Andrea, you had a slide about kind of a process timeline. Can you bring that up again?
Give me 1 second.
Or maybe Rich has it.
Yeah.
It was just kind of outlining the steps that you all take. And I guess what I was wanting to know out of that graphic is at what point do we hold executive sessions in that process? So you didn't actually describe when we actually hold executive sessions. Can you put, I don't know if it would help to see that again, but I was just wanting to know at what point, and maybe there's multiple points that we end up doing executive session, but just to be clear about like where that happens.
I think this
So
is.
yes. Thank you, Rich. Chair, counselors. So executive session happens well before this. So speaking of Santa Fe Estates, that's a great example of a very complicated situation. The city had decided to undergo that probably about 3 years ago, and it took us almost a year to do the due diligence that was required that no one had ever undertaken. So that's why we do start with looking at due diligence. It's some process. With Santa Fe Estates, I believe we had 5 executive sessions. Mm-hmm. So there were 5 executive sessions that occurred before any of this happened. And so we started, I think in December of 2019, discussing Santa Fe Estates. By November 2020, we terminated our agreement. And by then we had already talked to governing body and executive session about this process, and that land sale in particular brought out this process. So executive session happens, then we start this. We needed to obtain an appraisal for different reasons. So the appraisal itself was obtained by us because when we were negotiating, the other party had their own appraisal, and we wanted to see what it would be if we were selling it ourselves. And so that's why we obtained our appraisal. That might have been a little off schedule, but we did talk in executive session about that. And then the property was placed on sale, I think in February. So about 5 executive sessions to get to here.
Right, that makes sense. I guess I feel like each parcel is different. Each situation is different. But there have been some in the past that I feel like there wasn't necessarily some sort of consensus within the governing body about a piece of land and how we should move forward. And I think that's where that sticking point is for me. It's just that's some of the properties, they still wouldn't move forward. And there were still some things and questions we had about and concerns. So I guess that's why I feel like having a public vote after an executive session would be helpful. And I don't foresee this going through committees. I think it was really just a vote to decide if this makes sense for us to be moving forward with the type of sale or sale. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. What was the other question? Oh, I guess we didn't get an updated fiscal impact report. And given that this won't be going through committee and such, I'm wondering if that ends up being revised. And I don't know if you already have revised it, but I didn't see one. Did you all send a revised FIR?
Yeah. Mr. Chair, Councilor Villarreal, we are in the process of reviving it, so it will come to you probably tomorrow. Yeah, probably by tomorrow or the next day. But I had sent it to Jesse to route through finance and the legal team. But I extracted all the staff cost out of it. So.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have for now.
Okay, Councilwoman Lindell, you actually had your hand up after Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez, and then it went down and back up. So I'm going to let you ask your questions, and Councilwoman Romero Worth.
Thank you, Chair. I want to specifically look at the resolution on page 2, line 5. Starts on line 4. Whereas the governing body prefers to hold discussions, the disposition or sale of city-owned land or property transparently and in front of the public during a public meeting, unless doing so would harm the city's ability to leverage the competitive value of the real property on through. So, who determines that? Who makes the decision of that unless? That to me makes this very, very unclear, where someone may say, I think doing this harms our ability to competitively sell this property or to leverage it. Or on the other side, someone else may want to be confidential in talking about this property with the city or the council. I'm not sure really. I've never seen a situation where I didn't feel like a public land sale by the city wasn't transparent. I haven't seen that happen. And I think that some of the frank discussions that we've had in executive session have been really meaningful. And I don't think that we've sold City of Santa Fe property from a place of disagreement. But I'm concerned with that word unless. And I don't know who has the ability to say when we would be harmed or when it would affect the leverage of competitive value of the property. I'm concerned with that. The second thing that I'm concerned with is on the same page, lines 14 through 17, where all properties currently under consideration must be presented to the governing body for approval of desired announcement prior to announcing the land, building, or other real property is for sale, even if the governing body has already discussed such sale of such property in executive session. I'm not really sure what this accomplishes or why it's necessary. I know of one property that we're talking about selling, and it's already been in the newspaper. I'm just not sure why this is added on. I do appreciate that one of the sponsors will bring forward an amendment excluding things under 25,000. We've had a few of those over the years, just little tiny pieces of property or little tiny right-of-ways. But probably my greatest concern is in page 2, the item that starts in line 4 with the whereas. That's a concern to me, and I don't know how that gets resolved. I'll yield the floor for now.
Okay, Councilwoman Lindell, did you want one of the sponsors to try to answer your question?
Sure, if there's an answer to that, that would be great.
Okay, Councilwoman Vihel Koppler, I know your hand is up. It went up when she was asking the question, so go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The whereas starting at line 4, pretty much that was written when my draft was submitted. That was added by the city attorney's office, and that language, as I read it, is basically to describe what we do now. That's what's happening currently. Is it says where we prefer to discuss the sale of land in public, sometimes, unless, I guess, that has to be done in executive session for those reasons. That's pretty much, as I understand these whereases, you're trying to describe what we do now. And then the be therefore resolved is what changes something specific about what we're doing now. But I didn't have any issue with that added language from line 4 to line 8, but that is how I understand it. Thank you.
Okay, Councilwoman Lindell.
Well, thank you, Chair. I guess I would ask legal, because I think that we're understanding it differently. That's not how I understand it. And now is probably the time to get clarity of what it is saying, because that is not how I'm reading this.
Ms. Salazar.
Chair, Councilor Lindell, I think that the intent behind paragraph that's on 4 through 8 is that we would present at public hearing as a discussion item about the announcement, unless we were unable to do so. And so those circumstances are if there's confidentiality, if there's strategy, if there is attorney-client privilege, if there is litigation issue, if there is a breach of a lease issue, if there is some issue that potentially could harm the city by revealing it, those are the times that we would go into executive session. I would explain, and I think we've tried to be as candid as possible, that potentially every sale that we queue up for you may have that problem. And so it is important to be explicit that says, if it does have that problem, we will bring it into executive session. I think something that has been fleshed out tonight that might be something for an amendment potentially is the discussion that, a desire to have an executive session to speak frankly, and then have it as an action item, and not necessarily as a presentation exactly about everything, all the strategy, but as a presentation that explains that this will be going on the market, and then having council vote in public seems to be a little bit more of the desired effect here, rather than presenting strategy to the public. So if that is the case, I would request that potentially we amend this so that it is clearer. And so we're not getting confused by what the process actually is.
Well, I would welcome that. That makes much more sense to me than how I'm seeing it right now. Because I think that certainly whenever you sell property, whether it's property that, is complicated property or worth hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, or very simple property, I certainly think that there is, in almost every sale, some conversations that are confidential and that have to do with the strategy of the contract to sale or how marketing will be. I think what you just described is something that I would be much more comfortable with than what I'm reading here right now.
Anything else, Councillor Lindell?
No, I'm done. Thanks.
Okay, Councilwoman Romero Worth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a number of questions, but I'll just start with that paragraph since we've just had a conversation about it while it's all fresh in our mind. And as the city attorney's office works on the language, if you go on further, there's some things that I think are kind of tripped up there. So if you go after unless, so the governing body prefers to hold discussions of the disposition or sale of city-owned land or property transparently and in front of the public during a public meeting unless, and then there's a whole list of things, right? Doing so would harm the city's ability to leverage the competitive value of real property. Confidential market strategy is not a factor. Shouldn't it say confidential market strategy is a factor? And then it goes on to the next one. There are no reputational interests at stake. I think it should say there are reputational interests at stake because the qualifying word is unless.
Yes.
So, and it keeps going. Relevant laws do not require confidentiality. I think if relevant laws require confidentiality, then we won't do things in public. And there is actual or threatened, and there is no actual or threatened litigation to consider. So again, all of those things that make the list in the negative, I think need to be in the affirmative as you consider how you change that language. So I want to go back. Ms. Salazar, you talked about some sort of confidential memo. Did you send that about process, about how we the disposition of property? Did you send that recently? Because I don't think I received it.
Chair, councilors, I apologize. That's not a recent document. I believe this document was created back in January of 2020. I believe I have sent it a couple of different times, but I'm happy to resend it to everyone.
Okay, and I remember we did discuss that in executive session, and it helps us understand the various processes for how we go about the disposition of property, correct?
Yes, Councillor.
And I think it would be good for you to send that, because I think one of my concerns with what's happening here is that we need to understand what drives the current process. So you have a slide that's outlining a process for us. Some of that is dictated by law, and I believe it's state law. But maybe you can talk about that. What are the roots of that process? Some of it is maybe just staff work saying, hey, these are the things that we should do to have a good process in the disposition of public land. Some of it I don't think you have a choice about. Can you maybe speak to that a little bit?
Chair, Councilor Romero-Worth. So the slide that we showed you of the process that staff undertakes to put something on the market actually is not a legal process required.
Okay.
What occurred was out of Santa Fe Clay, these were the requests made of staff in order, when you move forward with a sale, these are the things we want to see you do. We want the public to know that it's on the market. We want an appraisal that we do ourselves. And we want you to queue up this type of sale and then go through the actual statutory process. So the decision tree that you had talked about is the statute, is 3-54-1, which is the required process. And that required process is when there is a sale, then we have to go with an ordinance and a purchase agreement and move that through public hearing with a referendum period based on how much the price of the property. So
Okay.
that's required on all sales.
So, and when you talk about statute, you're talking about state law.
Yes.
So that's not in our own ordinance, that's state law. So when we get ready to actually go through with the sale, state law dictates the things we have to do, including a referendum period, so that the public can object to the sale if it's something, if we tried to sell, I don't know, something that was just wrong. Correct? Just
Yes, Chair, Counselor, yes.
okay. And so we don't, our own ordinances don't speak to a process for the disposition of land.
Chair, Counselor, I believe the only thing that is contained in our city codes is that we have an asset development or someone designated at the city who sells our land. And so currently that is Sean Moody. But
Okay.
I think that is the only requirement. And then when you are signing the deed, it must have the mayor and the city clerk's signature. But those are the only things that exist in our codes.
So I think what this resolution has done is exposed the fact that maybe what we need to be doing here is the hard work of developing an ordinance about how we dispose of land, and that we think about all the angles and all the situations that we find ourselves in to figure out what is the best process moving forward. I am concerned that this is a resolution. In my mind, it's like a memorial at the state level. It says what we think should happen. It has no force of law and likely to be forgotten over time. We've seen that time and time again, where somebody, brings us. I think we saw that in a presentation about how we were supposed to read to babies or give baby books or something. I can't remember. It was decided by resolution, and of course we've completely forgotten about it, and we don't do it anymore. So it seems like maybe we're using the wrong vehicle to get what we are trying to accomplish here. So let me just throw that out there. Let's go, since you mentioned Santa Fe Clay, would this resolution have done anything to address the Santa Fe Clay situation? It's my, and
Yeah,
let me
yeah,
read.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
my understanding is that, and I think we've been over this, we've had a study session about this, and it's complicated for us to understand that we don't control what happens on the rail yard. That's a totally separate process. So would this resolution have done, I mean, that deal was done through the Rail Yard Corporation in conjunction with a master plan for how that property should be developed. Isn't that correct?
So Chair, Counselor Romero-Worth, I think, so if we were doing Santa Fe Clay today and they queued up a sale for us, what we would then do based under this framework we're talking about is tell that purchaser, hold on, don't do the ground lease, don't offer us, we're going to put this on the market and entertain for a period of 60 days and start marketing that piece of property to then queue it up for sale. So it might have augmented, what happens. I don't know if it would have changed the result. We did have numerous people contact us wanting to purchase the building. And as soon as they found out that there was a ground lease attached to it, were not interested at all. So will it augment it? I don't know. I don't know if it would. It didn't necessarily augment the outcome when we did receive other people interested.
But they weren't dealing, were they dealing with you? I thought they were dealing with the Rail Yard Corporation.
Counselor, you are correct. The problem, so Santa Fe Clay is different than Warehouse 21. And the reason is both the building and the ground lease were under the lease and management agreement. So
the Rail Yard Corporation.
Yes, of SFRCC. So they had the right to lease both, and they could lease both at any time. Instead, that individual wanted to purchase the building and we own it. So that is why SFRCC brought it to us and said, do you want to sell this or do you want us to keep it as a lease and keep leasing it? And so we opted to sell it when we understood, you know, what the building contained, and the fire code has all the different things that were part of that building. And so, yes, that was completely under their lease and management agreement. Warehouse 21, if we're comparing it, we control the building, they control the ground. So it will be a different structure.
They say that again, they control the building. Wait.
No, we control the building.
We control the building, yeah.
They control the ground.
But so let's go back to Santa Fe Clay. So we would have had to have a public vote about whether the council wanted to sell Santa Fe Clay?
I believe so.
Under this resolution?
I believe so.
That's
but it still would have been pursuant to SFRCC accepting that purchaser. So we still necessarily wouldn't have had control, because if they didn't want to enter into a ground lease, or SFRCC did not want to lease it to whoever we thought was the best seller, then they could say no. They had a lot of control in that outcome.
Mm-hmm. Because that seems to be the thing that keeps coming up as one of the reasons for this resolution. The other one is the Alto Street property, and the where again we own. Let's see if I get this right. We own the building, and somebody else owns the land. So to your point earlier, where you said every single thing we own, there's complications with it. None of these properties are clean. And I think actually the sponsor in the governing body meeting said that was one of the things that led to this resolution, was the fact that there was a sense that property would be put on the market, and the council had not voted to do so. And it was discussed in executive session, and there was not consensus. There was one counselor who thought there should be something different done. And so it sort of brings also to the, rises to the surface, what happens when one counselor doesn't like the direction that we're moving in the disposition of property. And so maybe that's the sort of thing that, again, I mean, if I don't know what you do about that. And maybe we need larger discussion, and maybe this should be an ordinance. And there were certainly issues with that other direction, the sense that, we could somehow use that property for housing when we have the property at Midtown, which we could also use for housing, which we can't afford to keep at the moment. And then we were talking about adding more property, and I don't know where we were going to get the money to buy that property and to put housing on that property when we can't even, afford the property we have and put housing on that property. So it just, I don't know. And I guess it goes, so all of this too goes back to transparency. We have known about all these land sales. We discussed them in executive session. The the public knows when we put a for sale sign on them or we stick them up on a website saying, hey, they're for sale. So I'm not sure. I don't think there has been any, backdoor dealings where we haven't told anybody something's for sale. We knew as a council that things were for sale. We may not have had total agreement that something should be for sale, but there was general, yeah, that's a good thing to do. We should sell that. Can we go back to the 6-month drag? Why is there, the FIR says there's a 6-month drag. Why is there a 6-month drag, a potential 6-month drag? Is that just for the whole process, or this particular resolution is going to cause, I'm confused about that.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Rivera, can I speak to that?
Yeah.
So it should say up to 6 months, and I think Council Vihel Copper kind of clarified something for me tonight about the fact that we may not need to go through committee to make any of these public offerings presentations. They can go from executive session to a public discussion to a governing body. So that really does cut it down, because if we go from executive session, because there are a lot of confidential issues that we have to discuss, then we come back to out of that session and then come through the committee meetings, because my initial assumption was that we'd have to publicly discuss this through the current process, 2 committees and a governing body. And so it sounds like we may not need to do that. So it does cut the time down. So if we go to executive session and then from this executive session, then have a public debate at a governing body hearing and vote on yes or no, then it will cut it down. The question that's still outstanding for me is that I don't know whether or not my department has the authority to ask for an appraisal at the time of our first presentation, or do we need to wait for council approval because we have to make the investment? And so Council Villarreal Copper did say that you could put an appraisal on hold, a yes or no hold. So we have to work through those details too. But there is that there's that fiscal impact that it could be many discussions that we have. As you know, we did on our presentation, we've been talking about these properties since January of 2020, and we are now still discussing these properties. And while we've had some consensus going through, I don't know, I'm looking into a cloudy future, how long it would take from the discussion through committee or governing body before we get to that next stage where we put a sign on the ground that says for sale. But we've had some clarity tonight, so it possibly
well, and I'm going to disagree that we have clarity, because I'm not sure I believe that we can avoid the committee process. And so, for instance, at the last meeting, I don't know if you can see this, the City of Santa Fe instructions for completing fiscal impact report forms. Now, certainly the sale of property has a fiscal impact, correct?
Mr. Chair, Councilor, yes, it does.
And we would do an FIR for the sale of property, would we not?
Yes, we would. Yes.
Okay. And so our current procedures say bills or resolutions with a fiscal impact must be reviewed by the Finance Committee. Bills or resolutions without a fiscal impact generally do not require review by the Finance Committee unless the subject of the bill or resolution is financial in nature. So I don't know how you avoid the committee process if you're selling property. I think by the FIR and by the very nature that it's fiscal in nature, it has to go to the Finance Committee. I don't think you can skip the committees. And I think, I guess I would ask that the city attorney also the city attorney's office also look about, when we can and can't skip committees. I don't think we can. I think, public utilities, public works probably needs to be involved in that conversation. Finance needs to be involved in that conversation. I don't think you can just skip the committee process. So I take issue with that thought that was raised tonight. Yeah, and I think that, Mr. Brown, the thing that you mentioned about the appraisals and the staff time, I mean, there was some indication that, oh, you guys, I mean, if you think you need to sell a property, you just come in front of us and say, hey, we want to sell, X building. and after we answer your questions and you vote, you can go do more work. The problem is in order to answer our questions, you're going to have to know a fair amount about that property. So to think that there isn't work, due diligence work that goes on prior to it coming in front of us, I think is wrong also. I do want to go back to this public versus private sale. I still don't quite understand this. A public sale is when you put it out to the public and say, hey, it's for sale. And a private sale is when somebody comes to you, like a private landowner, like we were talking, these little pieces of property, they come to you and they say, hey, we'd like to buy this little strip because it's attached to our yard and you guys don't need it. And I mean, can you explain again the difference between public and private?
Chair, Councilor Romero Worth. So under defined terms from the statute, a private sale is a negotiated sale, which may be with any interested party as long as either the sales price is at or above the appraised price, or the governing body justifies the reason for selling below the appraised price. A public sale is a type of sale in which the city must accept the bid of the highest responsible bidder in response to the city's published terms of sale. The only reason to reject a bid is if it does not meet the published terms. Terms and conditions for a proposed public sale or lease must be published at least twice, not less than 7 days apart in publication. So that these are actual terms that come out of the statute that we had discussed earlier, 3-54-1.
Okay, so state law, again, I think it's important. Sometimes, you know, when we say statute, not everybody realizes what we're pointing to. So state law dictates the difference between a public and a private sale. All right,
yes.
Thank you. So why didn't we come out of executive session and vote on some of these properties that we had discussed? I guess besides the length of time, what else do we lose by doing that? Why haven't we done that to date?
Chair, Councilor, technically announcing a piece of property for sale isn't a legal requirement. It doesn't require an action item. Most of the items that come out of executive sessions, such as settlement agreements, decisions to litigate, decisions to accept a proposal or to sell a piece of land, which means we're going to be putting it in an ordinance and actually selling it. All of those legally require the governing body to make a vote. So there is no statute, so state law, city code, or any other thing that designates the governing body must take action to announce any piece of property for sale. It's really at that disposition point, which is the actual sale, we're going to be selling it. That's the only requirement, is to get approval by the governing body.
Okay, so once again, this leads me to believe that perhaps we need a process defined in our ordinances for how we do this. I mean, another example of, you know, maybe rather than a resolution that just sort of says this is what we think ought to happen, we ought to require it by law, and we ought to think through how we do this. There was another, I'm not sure, I wrote something down here. And it was, I think it was something, if there's an unsolicited offer and you come to us, so I guess this was going back to the Warehouse 21 conversation. So if we get I believe that's right? Where there was an unsolicited offer, am I correct on that?
Mr. Chair, Council, that's correct. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We have it on many of them, but that
Chair,
one especially.
Councilor, I think it's important to say that almost every property we've talked about has an unsolicited offer.
Okay, so And there was some questions about what do we do when we have an unsolicited offer, and do you want us to make a full public offer? That would be the question. And normally, isn't that done in executive session? Right now, under our current way we do things?
Mr. Chair, Councilor, if I could start first, maybe Andrea can expand upon it, but through the time we've been speaking through executive session from June until probably November, I think was the last meeting, we have been discussing these unsolicited offers that we brought to a further idea around we could sell this property. We now have market interest. So we've had those conversations. We haven't had any decisions moving forward on any specific one, especially Warehouse 21, because there's a lot of complications behind it, but we've had those conversations about the unsolicited offer has come. Here are some strategies around what we can do. And then we were looking for consensus. So, so that has been happening, but no
right.
decisions
So
been made.
so that just sort of makes my point that it's not that we haven't known. We have known. We have been talking about these things, as you said, for the better part of a year, about our options, about some of the things that are coming forward. So it's not, again, I'm not exactly sure what this resolution is trying to solve, honestly. But I do think it brings up a larger problem of we don't have an ordinance that talks about how we dispose of land. And maybe that's the thing we ought to be working on, so that we can really point to a rule and a process and make sure that, you know, I agree that the disposition of land, of public land, is a very, very important thing. I mean, good Lord, we have state law on it. That should tell you how important it is. But the fact that we don't have any ordinance, any city law on how we do this, that to me, I think is what we need to be doing, not a resolution for one small piece without a consideration to the bigger picture. All right, I think I've belabored this long enough. I'll yield. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez, and then it is 7:18. We still have a benefits presentation, but if the committee wants to continue to discuss this, we'll continue. But Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez.
You know, I think throughout the course of this conversation, this has become murkier, not clearer to me as to when this applies. I think that I was going off of some of the different definitions of when a public sale, of this very specifically being a public sale. So how I was interpreting this is, for example, Santa Fe Estates, we would have gone into executive session. All the due diligence would have already been done, because to be honest, I can't vote on whether or not I want to put a piece of property for sale unless that due diligence has already been done. And then we would have come out, and then there would have been a vote, and we would have said, yes, we want to go ahead and list this property for sale. That had been my interpretation and understanding based on some of our previous conversations of the different paths for disposing of property. So for example, if it was a private sale, my understanding was that we would have had to vote on that anyway. And at that moment, we could have voted it down. And then in a separate action, asked for it to come forward to us as a public sale. So I guess I'm looking for some clarification, because I believe that I was interpreting this differently, both in terms of what it means for when this would come to governing body, in terms of a vote, and also the different situations that it would necessarily apply to. My understanding is that it would not have impacted the Santa Fe clay sale at how it came to us, unless we could have, which we did have the option of voting that down and then saying, now we would like you to go for it as a public sale. So I think that's what's kind of hard for me, is that over the course of this conversation, I'm realizing that how I had been interpreting this and how I was reading this resolution doesn't seem to be the intent of my understanding from the sponsors, both in when this would come in the timeline and the various situations that it would potentially apply to. So that's something that I really feel a need for clarification. I am still in favor of a public vote. I think that that is important, the opportunity for us to say, you know, if there is a majority of the governing body that is in favor of this moving forward, let's move forward with it. Let's go ahead and vote on that. But it seems to be applying to a variety of situations that I did not read it as applying to. And I think, Andrea, you made the point that the definitions that are utilized don't seem to be the same. So for me, I think that that's a lot of clarification that I would need before fully moving forward with this. I am still in favor of a public vote on a public sale. But to Councilor Romero-Wirth's point, I do think that this does bring up the broader implications that we need to be looking at the full spectrum of all the different pieces that have to be considered and what a city ordinance would look like. So I'm not sure if anybody has some clarification, but for me, there's a couple big things. One, I would not be able to vote on putting a piece of property up for sale unless I had information on that property, unless that due diligence had been done. So I would not feel comfortable voting on this before all of those various executive sessions had happened. And really my understanding is that after those, when we are at that decision point, when we are about to put this on the market, that then there is a public discussion to the extent that we can have a public discussion without any harm to the potential sale or any loss to the city. And at that point, there would be a public vote where we would vote and say, yes, the majority of the governing body or all of the governing body is in favor of this, or no, the majority of the governing body is not in favor of this, in which case we would not move forward. But I'm hearing that I might have been wrong in that interpretation. So if I could get some clarification, that would be helpful.
Okay, and then do you have, Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez, do you have other questions after that?
Nope, that's it. Just clarification on where this goes in the process and exactly which sales this does impact, because my interpretation of the resolution is very different than apparently what is being presented today. So thank you.
Okay, Councilwoman Vihil Coppler, do you want to try to address that question?
Well, I heard a lot of questions, so I'm not sure which question. Is it that there's a not understanding about what this is for, or, I mean, I can tell you this. I see this as quite simple. Number one, we're not engaging the public in what we are responsible for in terms of our fiduciary responsibilities, because we do everything in executive session. And that's big to me. So not only that, but after executive session, we move to action. And I see that as a fine line of a violation of the Open Meetings Act. And whether that conflicts with state statute or not, I don't know. But I do know this. I don't consider consensus or almost consensus as a vote and enough to take something to action. So two things about this. Number one, I believe that it addresses moving a discussion into the public where these items in this resolution, although I might agree with Councilor Romero-Wirth that they should be in the positive, not in the negative. I think we have that a little switched around, but when that isn't an issue, and we can still discuss those in executive session, but the point is we need to come out and vote in public. And that vote should be a discussion of whatever nature it takes. Sometimes these things will be cut and dry, sometimes they won't. I mean, I can give an example, not that this would happen, but we're dealing with Midtown right now. Can you imagine? Like, one of the options is to sell the Midtown property. Can you imagine all of us going in executive session and discussing that, and then tell staff, okay, go sell it. And totally not taking a vote and totally not involving the public. That is what we're doing today with other properties. And I think they're just as important because we continue to leave the public out and we continue to consider consensus as a vote. And I think that's wrong, or lack of consensus. That's all this is. And I don't, you know, I can understand some of these concerns, but some of these waters are being muddied. And, you know, there's some fixes. I guarantee that amendments can be addressed as was brought up tonight. There's some very good points. But the biggest issue here is public transparency and not violating the Open Meetings Act. And those are two big things. And that's what I think is important here. Now, do we need, you know, everything is, oh, we need to solve these world city problems with more ordinances and all this stuff. Okay, fine. But this is a resolution that deals with the current now. There's no problem with, you know, let's say I going back and creating an ordinance for this. I don't know, you know, how long that will take, but this resolution addresses public transparency today. And then if an ordinance is created, fine and dandy, we can, you know, we can do that. But this helps us today. And that's why I'm bringing it forward. And I don't have any particular allegiance to any property the city has or doesn't have, but I just think it's important to be careful with taxpayer money, to have a discussion in front of the public about taxpayer money, and land is money, property is money, and not violate the Open Meetings Act. And I shouldn't have to read in the newspaper something that we didn't even take action on, you know, that it's a fait accompli. And that's why I proposed this. I'm just tired of moving from executive session into action with no vote. It's not acceptable. That's it.
Counselor, I do want to reiterate that there are no violations of the Open Meetings Act. The Open Meetings Act has a specific provision for attorney-client privilege that is allowed to go in executive session. It's not made to be public. And the other, there are 10 exceptions. And one of them in particular is meetings for the discussion of the purchase, acquisition, or disposal of real property or water rights by the public body. And I just want to reiterate, because for me, hearing we're violating the Open Meetings Act is a very serious claim, and we are not doing that. So I just want to be sure that that is on the table.
Mr. Chair?
Okay, go ahead, and then we're going to go to Counselor.
You know, I'm not accusing us of doing that. I'm just saying that it's important that we don't do that in the future. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with taking a vote on things. There's not anything wrong with that. We do that often in executive session. We come out and there's a agenda item with a potential vote. You know, we don't always have to invoke the item, but there's a potential vote. And I'm not saying we shouldn't discuss things in executive session. But when there's, you know, I'm concerned about the public, and I think that's important. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay,
Mr. Chair.
Councilor Sanchez, you had the floor when you're asking these questions.
Thank you. Let me clarify, because I understand why this is coming forward, but my question is a question of process, of where does this resolution insert itself? So at one point you have said that by us voting here, that means that before any of the work is done, then they know, then our team knows that there's an interest from the governing body to put this up for sale. And then at the other end, you have said after we come out of executive session and we have all the information, then we vote. So I think that that's where my confusion has been. I, again, am in favor of the idea of after we have this information, we go into executive session, we discuss what we can't discuss in public in executive session, we come out, we discuss what we can discuss in public, and then we vote. But that's a very different point in the process then if the vote is coming and saying, hey, we might be interested in selling this, now go out and do the due diligence. So that was one of my questions of where in the process does this resolution occur?
Okay, so would it be, my question is, would it be before the 60-day notice? And if so, do we need to clarify that in the resolution? Councilwoman Vihel Koppler, maybe you can answer.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. The intention here is to, first of all, make a determination whether we want to sell a piece of property or not. It's not always going to be the same. Sometimes these smaller pieces of property are, for lack of a better word, they're no-brainers. Sometimes it is going to be necessary to do the due diligence before we can make up our minds. I can't say in which, which is different. All I can say is that my belief in this resolution is that we need to get, rather than just consensus or lack of consensus, we need to actually have a vote and a discussion in public. It can be before the 60-day notice, it can be after. It just depends on what is the best, what is the circumstance behind the property? What does it dictate? Like, for example, Midtown, if we were to say might want to sell that, that would take much more discussion than just a simple piece of property that's in a neighborhood.
Okay, so my understanding then is that there's always that point when staff is saying our recommendation is that we sell. And so at that point, when staff has come to the conclusion that they have enough of their information, that they're able to come forward to us with that recommendation, that is the point that the vote would occur. Am I correct? Is that a good general understanding?
I think that's a good understanding, Mr. Chair. And I think that the staff will determine, they know more, the asset development manager, that's his or her role. They'll, they probably know more about properties than we think they know. And sometimes it's going to be easy to come forward with the data that we need because that's what they've been working with for their career. Sometimes it's going to be maybe something that needs more study, more research.
Thank you. And then the other one that I think has become murkier for me is, again, based on the past conversations we've had about the various pathways to dispose of property. There's the public sale, the private sale, the RFEI. Andrea, wasn't there one more? Isn't there 4 pathways? Did I miss one? Or were there
There's
3?
5. There's land swaps with government entities, and then there's potentially LIDA or affordable housing that we donate property, and that's a disposition.
So my reading of this, as it does state with the public sale, prior to announcing the availability of any city-owned land, building, or other real estate for sale. So that would include private sales as well as public sales, but it would not impact RFEI, land swap, LIDA.
Chair, Counselor, I think I'd have to think about that because I think if we were putting it up as a request for proposal where we're actually asking for criteria, that might apply as well under this scenario.
Okay. And so that's important, I think, information that I definitely want to have by governing body is the understanding of it. In which situations is this applying and in which situations is it not applying? Did I say implying? Which situations does this apply and which situations does it not apply? All right, that's those are all my questions. Thank you.
Okay, I think the Finance Committee may be ready to make a motion, but Councilor Garcia, I'll let you give a final word before I call for the question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to point out several times tonight that we've said the royal we. Sure, we as governing body members, we're aware of these processes. We're forgetting about the other we as a city. And I think, it was definitely misrepresented by some of my colleagues earlier that we've always done things in a transparent manner. I don't know if my colleagues didn't receive, if not hundreds or thousands of emails throughout the Santa Fe Clay process, that it wasn't transparent. And I think this is what we want. We want to ensure at the end of the day that the public is well aware that the governing body has approved for a piece of property to go up for sale. And that's the intention of this resolution, is to introduce transparency into the process. Now, whether everybody is in agreement, that's not going to slow it down. I think the point was made earlier that we might not have consensus, and having this would slow down the process. I don't buy that. What this does is it builds transparency into the process. And this is what the public has been asking for. And we're going to have some folks try to find every which way to kill this process and argue that, and muddy the water that, well, let's create an ordinance. Well, let's create an ordinance. Let's do that. Yes. But we've got to remember that we've got a number of properties that want to be sold right now. So we need to have a process for right now. And then let's develop an ordinance, because I'm all for that. We can do two things at once. It doesn't have to be one or the other. So with that, let's work together to bring transparency to our process. Our community wants this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm going to make a motion. I know there's some adjustments we have, making those language changes in that section about land sales into the affirmative, but I think we could change that with an amendment later on, as well as any other kind of language that would clarify process, I think. But I do think the heart of this is important. And I don't think we need an ordinance to say it's important. I was thinking back about other legislation we've had, specifically the sanctuary policies we have and procedures. That was not an ordinance, that was a resolution. And we very much follow that very strictly. It's important, and it's what in our DNA, if you will, for a lot of things that we do in the city. I was also thinking about what my colleague said about some of these, what we vote in after executive session that has fiscal implications and that it needs to go through committee. Well, there's been times that we've had litigation, like we're agreeing to a litigation, and it's going to potentially require us to hire outside litigators and attorneys, and that doesn't go through committee. We go through, talk about it at executive session, and then we actually do a vote. So it's not necessarily all the same. So it depends on what it is. So I think that moving forward, we can make some adjustments, but I'd like to make a motion to move this forward with the intention that we're going to get a new FIR and also make some amendments for language changes.
Okay, so just so I'm clear on the motion, so you're approving it in the form that it's in, I guess, because we have to, we don't have something else.
Well, I mean, I could spend time trying to find amendments for that section that we were talking about that needed to be in the affirmative. I do think all of those points need to be switched, but I don't know if we have the appetite for that now.
Okay.
I think we can we can do an amendment sheet for that, as well as any other language changes. So I'm moving as is, with the intention that we will get an updated FIR and also language amendments as needed.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a second. Any further discussion? Councilor Lindell.
You're on mute.
You're on mute, Councilor Lindell.
I'd like an opportunity after we vote to explain my vote.
Okay,
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Can I have a roll call, please?
Yes. Counselor Cassett Sanchez.
Yes, and I'd like an opportunity to explain my vote as well.
Okay. Counselor Villarreal.
Yes.
Counselor Lindell.
I'm going to abstain.
Thank you. Counselor Romero Worth.
No, and I'd like to explain my vote.
Okay. And Counselor Abate.
Okay, I'll vote yes. So I believe the measure passes. And we'll start with Councilwoman Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. I abstained because the way that this resolution stands now, I can't support it, which is what we were asked to vote on. And I think it needs amendments. And until I would see those amendments, and I'll probably work on some of my own, I can't support this. So I couldn't give this a yes vote because the way it sits right now is not acceptable to me to say yes to it. So that's why I abstain, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've a similar viewpoint of Councilor Lindell, although a slightly different vote. As Councilor Villarreal stated, I do agree with the intention of this measure, even though there are some language changes that I do need to see. I do believe that there are some amendments to address the process and some clarification pieces before I would be willing to give a final vote at council. But again, I did move this forward because I agree with the intention behind the measure, even if I think, or the resolution, even if I do feel that there is some work to be done before it could be passed at a council meeting. So thank you.
Okay, Councilwoman Romero Worth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I voted no because I think actually this item should be postponed and we should get the current FIR and we should make the changes. The work should be done in committee and not at the governing body level. And this bill is not ready to go in its current form. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. So that brings us to presentations. Thank you, Councilor Vigil-Koppler and Councilor Garcia for sticking with us through this and participating in the discussion. I appreciate it. Okay, so our presentation is on Aon. This isn't an action item, but I do want to hear it. If there are committee members that can't stick through it because it's already going late, I'm sure this won't be the first time we'll hear it, but I do want to give Aon the opportunity to at least make a quick presentation to us. And then Ms. McCoy and Ms. Salazar, if you could give us direction after the presentation. And then again, if there's committee members that need to exit, feel free, but I do want to give Aon the courtesy of at least giving us a brief presentation. So Ms. Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will go ahead and turn it over to Todd Burley. This is just a regular update on where we are as far as our claims are concerned. So the presentation will be brief, but again, just wanted to provide the Finance Committee with an update as to where we are.
Mr. Chair, councilors, thank you for your time. I will quickly go through the financial status of the health and dental plans. This is data from July through the end of January 2021. Enrollment's down about 3%. The important lines below row 7, funding year to date, that's both the city share and the employee share, is a little less than 11.2 million. If you move down to row 16, the costs year to date are about 11.8 million. Row 17, that's about a $630,000 shortfall in the first 7 months of the fiscal year. And line 20, that's about a 5.6% deficit. Next slide. This just shows the same information on a monthly basis. Really, the only thing of note, if you go to the bottom section, rows 10, 11, 12, that's the effect of COVID, where you can see claims. The medical claims are substantially lower than the prior months. And current year to date, you can see up top, there's about 9.2 million in medical claims, 1.5 million in pharmacy claims. Pharmacy was relatively unaffected by COVID. Next slide. Same information on a graphical basis. We can skip this, sorry, it's late. Here's what's really driving the performance so far year to date. You can see last year there were 15 claimants over 125,000, which is half of your $250,000 stop loss policy. So far year to date, there are only 7 for about $1.5 million as compared to last year where you had 15 for almost $4.2 million. This is what's really driving the performance so far this year. Next, we'll move to dental. Don't be alarmed by column E, where you see a 19.1% increase in claims. Your membership was essentially unable to go to the dentist in April and May of 2020. So you can see last year claims dropped by 17.8%. They've risen 19.1% this year, which essentially gets you back to where you were prior to COVID. No alarm here. About a $40,000 surplus in dental so far this year. Typically, dental, since the funding was changed a couple of years ago, runs about $100,000 surplus per year. Next slide is the same on a graphical basis, and I'll skip that in the interest of time and hand it over.
So, Mr. Chairman and councilors, so we wanted to briefly talk about what's coming up is, we're going to be coming to you with the renewal on your medical and other plans. And we thought it'd be a great opportunity to review kind of what we went through in last year's process. Pam, can you move forward to the next slide? So if you recall, in winter, early spring, we had the beginning of our annual review process. The renewal was forecasted to be a 1.9 million increase to the cost from the 2019-2020 plan year. In spring of 2020, we had several discussions of the annual renewal process. We had options that were presented to committees and the governing body during the fiscal year 2021 budget process, to include discussions about challenges that we were facing due to COVID-19, budget shortfalls, and employee financial constraints. Then in spring and early summer 2020, we moved to the decisions of the annual renewal process. And if you will recall, the governing body voted to use the health and dental fund balance dollars to offset the increased cost, the 1.9 million increase. This decision did not require the use of other city funding for the 2021 plan year, nor increases to biweekly rates for the employees. The discussed risk was that by depleting the health and dental fund balance, we will require the city to use general fund dollars if the city has another year of high claims consistent with the past 2 years. And then would also require the consideration of a margin be built into future renewals to assist with rebuilding the health and dental fund. So because of this would result in higher renewal increases and would not be a guarantee to rebuild the fund if paid claims continue to run high. And then as a reminder, we did make some minor plan changes last year that were also approved by the governing body. Bernadette, I'm turning it back over to you.
Yes, thank you, Dawn. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, with that, we will stand for questions, and in the upcoming committee meetings, we'll be bringing forward options for the renewal process.
Okay, thank you. I don't know who the hand that came up first on my screen is Councilor Lindell. Councilor Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Could you forward the screenshots to us, and if possible, with further information that'll come to us. Could you try to get that sent out to us prior to the meeting so that we can study it a little bit? And I appreciate that, so that I can be better prepared to ask meaningful questions. This information I would need to really study in order to ask questions that I think would be germane to the data. So that's all I have, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This item actually was accessible through PrimeGov, and now it's not. So I don't know if there's some change that happened, but now it's saying it's invalid. So I don't know if you all made a change to the presentation and reloaded it, but it no longer works. So I'm gonna have to go to your screen. Can you go back to the page about the medical? Let's see. Well, first on this page, before you go on, the presenter said the enrollment is down. And can you give us an explanation of why that is so?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, we do have some vacancies that would account for the reduction in enrollment. So that could result in the reduction. And also, just to clarify, the presentation was published on PrimeGov early on, because I believe we were scheduled to do it a little bit earlier. The only thing that changed in the presentation was the date in the front of the presentation, as well as we had another month of numbers. So I think the last presentation that you were able to access was through, I want to say November or December, and then we were able to get an additional month in there. So those were the changes. I apologize, but we'll make sure to get this emailed to you.
I think it's just the quirkiness of PrimeGov. If you change the title or the caption and there's some weird value that you put in, it rejects it. So we can't open it, but it also could be mine because I always have problems with PrimeGov. The other question I had was about if you could go on to the next slide. And the next slide after that. Let's see. So, okay, maybe after that you have a comparison. So there we go. Okay, so claims. You gave us a period of time, July 2019 to June 2020. So we're mid-range right now, right? For the claims for July 2020 to January 2021. And so are you saying we're on track to be similar to the claims that we had in that last budget cycle, or you're thinking that it'll be less this time period?
Mr. Chair, budget? Yeah, Mr. Chair, Councilor Villarreal, at the current pace, you should be lower than where you ended last year. Again, you're going to see a higher number of, you'll see more and more claimants appear on this list throughout the year as people have the opportunity, quote unquote, to move up to 125,000 in claims. But as you're running right now, you should end up short of the 4.1 million from last year.
Okay, so that's a good thing.
That is a very good thing. You can see your highest claimant so far this year is 236,000. You had an $800,000 claimant last year. Keep in mind, the city does have stop loss at 250,000, so the city's risk is limited to the first $250,000 of claims in a fiscal year.
Got it. Okay. Let's see. What was the next slide? Just to make sure I didn't. Okay. I think I agree with my colleague, just to get the information ahead of time, so we understand like what the implications are going to be financially for this budget season. So what's the time frame that you all would do another presentation?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, we're probably looking at about a month out. So probably in March, we'll be bringing forward the information.
Okay.
But we can certainly get you the presentation ahead of schedule.
Okay, that's great. That's all I have, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Do we have anywhere, if you're looking at where we are with our fund balance and how we are tracking with our fund balance in terms of what's left?
Mr. Chairman,
I'll fill that one, Mr. Chair. Councilor Cassette Sanchez, we will be providing that information as we move forward. So we are working on updating those tables based on the recent 7-month outlook that you, or 7-month history that you see here, and then the 5-month outlook projection for the remainder of the year. So that will be part of the March presentation that Director Salazar referred to earlier.
Wonderful, thank you. That will be very helpful as Councilwoman Villarreal was mentioning about the financial implications as we're coming up to budget season. And then we had previously discussed, I believe, about getting our medical. So right now we do our open enrollment, I believe in July, we start in July, we do open enrollment in May, something along those lines. But if we look at where a lot of other organizations and where the exchange, healthcare.com, excuse me, healthcare.gov, for the Affordable Care Act. Thank you for my brain for producing words. That is an open enrollment that takes place in the fall for starting in January. And so we had discussions of aligning so that if our staff had options through either a spouse through their employment, or if they wanted to look at the exchange, that it would align better. Is there a reason that we didn't do that this year? Is that still something that we are considering?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Cassette Sanchez, that's definitely something that we would strive to do to get in line with the calendar year because of ACA. However, that would require us to have 2 open enrollment periods in 1 year. And due to, the challenges this year, we just weren't able to do that, but certainly we can explore that. That would require an open enrollment now to ensure that we're giving employees the opportunities to make changes basically 12 months in, but then we would have to enter into another open enrollment probably by September or October for an effective date of January of 2022. So it would require those 2 open enrollment periods in a short period of time.
Right, thank you. I know that we had discussed that, and I understand that this year there was some other things to focus on. So that is something that I definitely want to keep on our radar and see if it is possible this upcoming calendar year to allow that so that our employees do have that flexibility in making those choices and can compare and contrast at the same time.
And I would like to also add that due to the pandemic, employees were able to make changes throughout this time, like an open enrollment as a result of COVID-19. So there was a lot of flexibility there as well.
That's good to hear. I did not know that. Thank you so much. I'm really happy that we offered that to our employees. So I know that that's worked for you guys. So I really appreciate you providing that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all I have.
Okay, any other questions? No, okay, then thank you. We look forward to the presentation in March. And then if Mary, if you and Ms. Salazar, if we can get together before that presentation with myself and Aon, just so that we're prepped for it. And then we'll be sure at that meeting to put Aon and the presentation first on the agenda and everything else, all the consent items after, so that we don't rush through that in March. So thank you, and thank you, Aon, for being so patient and staying with us this evening. Okay, so that takes us to matters from staff.
Mr. Chair, at this time, we don't have any updates. We look forward to providing a written update on our gross receipts tax distribution for the month of December. During the previous conversation, I did check TRD's website and we have not received that information yet from TRD, but hopefully within the next week we will. So look forward to that coming into your inboxes in written form.
Okay, great. Thank you. Matters from the committee. Okay, and I don't have anything other than our next meeting is March 1st, 2021. So with that, we are adjourned.